Dear unknown friends, while we were producing this episode, the United States bombed Iran. And part of the reason for this episode was to warn of the connection between Uranus entering Gemini and a historical pattern of the United States getting involved in a very serious conflict. We offer our prayers for divine intervention in this unfolding situation. Today, we present a forecast for Uranus entering Gemini and the correlation between this transit and significant events for the United States.
The United States is experiencing its third Uranus return since its founding in 1776, and this is occurring just a few years after its first Pluto return, which took place in 2022. This year, the nation also experiences a Jupiter return, which is quite helpful, as it may offset some of the more negative effects of difficult outer planetary influences. When we speak of historical cycles, we wish to emphasize history doesn't exactly repeat, but it rhymes. For those completely new to astrology, a planetary return simply means that the planet in question has returned to the area of the zodiac it was in at the time of birth. For America, this birthday is July 4th, 1776. Now, there are a few variations of the American chart. We use the Sibly Chart. What is the Sibly Chart, you ask? The Sibly Chart is the most commonly used astrological birth chart of the United States, cast for July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was popularized by astrologer Ebenezer Sibly, a British physician and occultist who used it in the 18th century to determine the birth of the U.S. Key details of the Sibly Chart. Date: July 4th, 1776. Time: 5:10 p.m. Place: Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sun: 13 degrees Cancer. Moon: 27 degrees Aquarius. Ascendant: 12 degrees Sagittarius. We find this chart the most compelling, as the Sagittarius ascendant best describes the nation's persona and projected image: expansive, pioneering, freedom-loving, and an independent spirit. Earlier this year, we released an episode on the Neptune entrance into Aries and the relationship that has to the Civil War in 1861, but we also emphasized the fact that Uranus was probably the stronger factor in terms of American conflict, and we pointed out that Uranus arriving in Gemini coincided with the American Revolution, and the two following Uranus returns coincided with the Civil War and America's entrance into World War II. Hence, we have called Uranus in Gemini the danger zone for the United States. This makes sense and validates the use of the Sibly Chart, as transiting Uranus in Gemini passes into the 6th and 7th house of the United States chart. The 7th house can signify partnership or open enemies. And this is the question for the United States going forward. On July 7th, 2025, Uranus makes its third return to Gemini since the nation's birth, which means, in some way or another, we will experience a repeat of previous themes that came up with Uranus in Gemini. President Donald Trump happens to be born at the tail end of the last Uranus in Gemini cycle, which is the primary reason we predicted him winning the 2024 election back in 2020. He has a very powerful and dynamic chart, and it is destiny that he is where he is, love him or hate him. Donald Trump himself now approaches a Uranus return. One thought we have had about this is that the nation is currently destined to what may seem like chaos, very erratic, very unstable conditions, as it is effectively going through a rebirth, and Trump is also experiencing the effects of a Uranus return. The old structures are being broken down by the Promethean influence of Uranus, which has some symbolic affinity to the lightning-struck tower of the tarot. The Trump presidency will be characterized by sudden and rapid changes, erratic behavior, and a very fast pace. And he is a man who has come into this incarnation learning many lessons about wielding power. Difficulties for Donald Trump come through Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto having entered his 6th house, this gives a lot of drive and ambition, and yet profound need to reflect inwardly and come from a pure intention of service. Deal-making and to some extent compromise are the path to success for Trump. We intend to have an episode on the astrology of Trump in the near future. He has a difficult road ahead. As Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, said of Uranus, "It is a planet of extremes, either very good or very bad. We suspect there will be a little bit of both." Now, getting back to the Uranus influence for America, here we see 2026 and 2027 as more intense for this influence. However, the reality is that over the next 7 years, the United States is going through profound transformation, and with that, there is a real danger starting now, but most pointedly in July, of internal and external conflict. In March, we warned about conflict with Iran and war in the Middle East specifically. We also mentioned that another aspect in play of great importance is the United States Pluto return that took place in 2022 and its subsequent entrance into Aquarius. The average lifespan of an empire, according to Sir John Glubb, is about the length of one Pluto cycle, 250 years. Sir John Glubb was a British soldier, scholar and writer best known for his essay The Fate of Empires and the Search for Survival, published in 1976. In it, Glubb outlines a theory that empires follow a predictable life cycle, typically lasting about 250 years, 10 generations, from rise to decline. Glubb believed empires go through 6 stages: pioneer stage, expansion through courage, exploration and military conquest, conquest stage, consolidation of power and control over new territories, commerce stage, prosperity through trade, economic development and accumulation of wealth, affluent stage, enjoyment of wealth, focus shifts from service to self, intellectual stage, rise in arts, debate, criticism and intellectualism over practicality, decadent stage, decline in civic virtue, rise in selfishness, dependency on the state, internal division and weakening leadership. And so it is that the United States has most likely entered the phase of decadence and risks seeing itself displaced as the supreme global power and may see a loss of global influence. The most important element here with respect to Pluto is the dollar's status as global reserve currency. The British Empire, by the estimates of Sir John Glubb, begins in spirit in about 1588, but its true greatness as a global influence began in the early 1700s during a Pluto in Leo transit. It ended during the following Pluto in Leo cycle in 1956 during the Suez Crisis. 1 complete Pluto cycle. The Suez Crisis occurred when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital waterway previously controlled by British and French interests. In response, Britain, France and Israel launched a secret military intervention to regain control and remove Nasser. Why was this a big deal? Geopolitical failure. Britain and France acted without US approval. President Eisenhower strongly opposed the intervention, fearing it would push Arab nations toward the Soviet Union. Loss of prestige. The crisis humiliated Britain and France, showing they could no longer act as global powers without US backing. End of empire signal. The Suez Crisis is widely seen as the moment Britain realized it was no longer a world superpower. It accelerated decolonization and the shift toward a more US-dominated global order. Rise of Nasser. Nasser emerged as a hero in the Arab world and a leader of anti-colonial resistance. Also of note, the American dollar became the global reserve currency in 1944, replacing the British pound. It has been said by some thinkers that empires typically hold the global reserve currency status for about 80 to 100 years. Thus, the US dollar is likely to lose this status in the next 2 decades. We are entering what I call the danger zone for conflict in July. Critics have been quick to point out there are always wars, and this is correct. Yet the 3 wars mentioned here that correlate to the cycle of Uranus are the most significant ones in US history. They are, in fact, quite exceptional. Other criticisms that have become a bit overused and cliché in the last few years are, correlation does not equate to causation. This is true, but at some point, a consistent pattern of correlation forces us to ask what law and principle is in play here. Now let us point out, the new transits are not all bad news. The fact remains that, while influences of the outer planets may prove uncomfortable, and many dangerous circumstances frequently come with them, they are moving us forward and reshaping society. They are great awakeners for those able to receive the influence and work with the unconscious. And remember, the planets incline but do not compel. With Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune and Saturn in Aries, and now Uranus entering Gemini, these are perhaps the most profound changes seen in many decades. The next great shift will not occur until Uranus enters Cancer in 2033. In the meantime, we have planetary positions associated with the most epic changes in American history. Neptune and Pluto now occupy the fourth house of the American chart for the first time since the Civil War. And this is wholly fitting given that the fourth house concerns domestic issues, domestic conflict potentially, issues of border security, and the general sense of a coherent cultural identity. Neptune creates an influence of wanting to dissolve boundaries, while Saturn would create them. The two planets in conjunction will have to create a synthesis and compromise.
Dear unknown friends, this has been a special astrological update. We hope you come back again for our regularly scheduled episodes, where we discuss Hermeticism, astrology, tarot, reincarnation, and many more related topics. We have many exciting episodes planned, so be sure to follow us here and on all of the socials. Visit our website, templeofthelivingfire.com, to learn about our esoteric school. Until next time, thank you and namaste, the philosophers of the living fire.